anyway, I'm very happy to be here with you. And the other interesting thing is that when I arrived here, I was chatting with Jordan, who's on his way out the door there. You can keep going. It's great. It's all good. And he said, so you've got the workshop on Sunday, Richard. And I said, workshop? What? I mean, I really had no idea. This is the truth. He said, well, yeah, we have you set up to do a workshop. I said, well, what do we do in the workshop? He said, no, you'll figure it out. Now, Foster's here. Did you know that you had to do a workshop? Yes. You did. So someone came prepared. I got the memo. I must have gotten it too, but it somehow just went out the door. But I do think this is a really nice opportunity for us, and I'm hoping that we can, even though I don't know if we have other microphones, like if people wanted to ask questions or interact, I don't really know what the best way for that would be. Just if you speak up, and since we're recording this, I'll try to repeat your question if it doesn't get picked up on the camera. So I guess that's the best way. So a couple of you were just chatting with me before we started and having some ideas about what we wanted to chat about. I have my own ideas, and I think I would start by just doing a quick background of my own interests that brought me into UFOs and into false flags, and to give you an idea of that evolution. Rather than a workshop sounds like a really formal thing for me, to be honest with you, at 9 in the morning. But I do think like a nice morning chat is a good idea that we could then develop into something that might be productive. And at first I said, do you want the whiteboard up? And I said, why the hell would I want a whiteboard? But then I thought maybe we do want something if there are ideas and we can kind of brainstorm. That seems a little ambitious for me, but maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm sorry. What's that? We're working on it, so it's all good. So I don't like going over my bio again and again. I've done this 1,000 times. Everyone asks me, how did you get interested in UFOs? But I will just very briefly indicate that I think it is kind of intrinsically interesting how I got into the field of UFOs, because it's sort of a microcosm of how we all kind of, every one of us breaks out of the matrix, as it were, in our own way. You know, that's how we all got here, it seems to me. I was always someone who was trying to look below the surface of things. Even when I was 10 years old, I think I was like that. And I always had a very strong interest in history and politics and literature and philosophy. That's just always been what I'm about. I was always like an egghead who liked to play baseball. That was my thing. And so when I was an undergraduate and graduate student in the university, I got very interested in oh, see, they're doing way better than I'm doing. I don't really. Yeah, we're gonna have. This is like a competition. I can tell. I'm really angry at Catherine because she's obviously killing it there. So, yeah, thank you. I don't know why I'm nervous. Why should I be? So I've always been interested in kind of getting below the surface of things, I'm sure like every one of you. And back in the 80s and 90s, when I was in that mode, there was no internet or web. And I remembered in my mid-20s trying to look into the history of the CIA. And in like the mid-late 80s, it was not the easiest thing to do. There were very few books, even in the library of the excellent University of Rochester, that really dealt in detail with the CIA's history. Think about how far we've come. There were some dry academic journals that were there and kind of tough to read. And that was basically it. And it occurred to me that, you know, this industry, this agency rather, which is so central to the history of our country, of America, over the past decades, there's almost nothing written on it. And what also, because it's by design, it's intelligence. If they're good at what they do, we don't know about it. It's a truism. And it occurred to me that the problem in studying the intelligence community is that because of that fact, because they kind of hide themselves in this black hole, we as a society, especially academic intellectuals, tend to overlook it. There's no documentation. Historians especially like to work off of documentation. And if there isn't any, then they would acknowledge, oh yeah, well there's probably a lot happening, but there's just no data. And I think that whole contribution to our world history gets overlooked. And I feel that there's been a long-standing bias in the university world against looking at the influence of the intelligence community. And then, they start talking about conspiracy theories and unproven assumptions and so on. But despite all of that, I was plodding my way through the university world thinking, I'll get my PhD and I'm going to teach at some university and I'll be king of a classroom somewhere and get a nice tenure and get summers off. That was absolutely my dream through my 20s. And toward that end, I did some travel. I was in Berlin during the period that the wall came down. That was tremendously engaging for me. I was doing German history at the time. And then that just hit a wall of its own. My German wasn't that great, honestly, and I was researching German political police in the 19th century under Bismarck. I was actually a guy who was like the forerunner of J. Edgar Hoover. His name was Wilhelm Stieber. You can look him up. And I was researching his career, and he sort of did dirty tricks like Hoover, but in the 1860s and 70s, and I was just overmatched by the topic, and I left and then quit. I met my future, now former wife, Karen, and it was a very lovely part of my life, and left the academic world for 2 years, and then came back to the University of Rochester for U.S. diplomacy, where I think I did very well. I had a good experience. I was studying Cold War strategy, Soviet studies, and then I fell into the UFO field. And I did it by stumbling in a bookstore and looked at a copy of the very excellent book by Timothy Good, Above Top Secret. Talked about this many times. It was a subtitle that caught my attention, The Worldwide Ufo Cover-Up. I think it was 1993, and I thought, really? Wow, cover-up. This is what I'm always interested in, just naturally would gravitate to it. And that was when my paradigm just kind of blew up. I really thought that I would only look at this for a few months and just decide for myself. It was a simple, personal endeavor to see, is this really what I want to do? Or is this really what I want to, wake up, Richard. To see if this was a thing. I didn't like having this question mark over my head about this important subject. Because even in the early 90s, everyone knew that there's rumors and cover-up and whatnot. It's so funny. I'm sure many of you have. Does anyone have like a good academic background in this room? Yeah, a number of you. I'm sure some of you are modest. And in that world, you know full well, this is a topic that you can't really broach easily. I'm jumping, but a few years later, I got a phone call from a professor at UCLA, chair of one of the departments, and he said, Mr. Dolan, I just want to let you know, he was talking very quietly, I really admire your work, I think you're a sane voice, et cetera, et cetera. I said, hey, thanks very much. How come you're whispering into the phone? He really was, and I said, he said, oh, yeah, sorry. Well, you have to know it's very political in my department. It really wouldn't go well if they knew I said, yeah. Well, that's everywhere. But anyway, I got into the UFO field and just kind of quietly reading Timothy's book and then going on what was in the internet, the news groups, Alt Paranet UFO and Alt Alien Visitor. Anyone remember these bulletin board groups? A few? And it was basically filled with, you suck, no, you suck. But then there were people who were actually intelligent and would put things out there. There was one guy who did something that I thought was brilliant, and he constructed chronologies of UFO history. And he was a political guy like me, and he was putting together this chronological information on all of these subsets of UFO history. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I have to do. And I created a chronology of my own that was based on hundreds of books and articles that I collected through the 90s. I meticulously went through this. This is what allowed me to do my book. So I would find the relevant bibliography, and I would read it. I would have a little pencil, and I would check every relevant fact, every single one. And then when I was finished with the book, I would create a word processing file, and I would transcribe literally transcribe every relevant fact in chronological order with a citation at the end of it. I don't know what. So I did that I did this with hundreds of books. And those are my chronologies of each book. And then I started combining my chronologies. So I would have books, all the classic books of the 50s and 60s. I read them all. And you know what I learned is when you re-transcribe all of that, it really gets inside you. I remember reading Hunter S. Thompson. What he did to help become an excellent writer is he literally retyped The Great Gatsby, word by word. And I think one of Hemingway's novels. And that's what people used to do 100 years ago to learn. You would rewrite, like Caesar's Commentaries or whatever. And it's a great tool. And it's kind of what I did in the UFO field. I ended up rewriting an enormous amount so that my combined chronology after a few years was itself a 500-page book. I'll never forget it. And I thought, I'm just going to write my own book. Because what I was able to do is, when you combine all of this chronological data from all of these sources, you really do see trends and patterns. And I figured I can just do this. And that was my first book, UFOs and the National Security State. And the whole process of going into it was the most fascinating thing I ever did. It was the most paradigm-shattering experience. And during that time was when I left the academic world. I studied UFOs secretly for an entire year. I didn't even tell my wife. Literally for 1 year. Because I was coming out of an environment where this topic was so, not done. You know, I had to go through this transition myself. Then I told her, she thought it was interesting. Then I told my family members. To my shock, they thought, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. And then I started, as I was writing my book in the late 90s, I was making some real headway. I started telling people, and I truly felt like I was coming out of the closet with this. That's exactly how I felt. I would tell people, yes, I'm writing a book about UFOs. And everyone, 1 out of 10 would think, oh, well, he's crazy. But then 9 out of 10 were totally engaged because they could see that I was engaged. And even by then, I'd had some knowledge, and they were interested. And it occurred to me, we're living in this world where there's this massive number of people who actually they have this hunger for truth. And we all go through, most of us very quietly, almost not even aware of it most of the time, that we have this hunger. So I felt like right away, even before I finished that first book, that I had an ability to engage with someone in a one-on-one basis and to kind of get them motivated and engaged in this. So it really boosted my confidence. And during that period, I just decided I'm cutting the cord. And I cut the cord with the academic world, and I said, I'm just going to be an independent scholar, and this is it. This is going to be my life. And it was a struggle. I didn't really expect to be talking about my personal life here, but I'll just wrap it up, and then we can open it up to some of the other topics that. But the other part of my journey was simply kind of coming into myself and really discovering who I was through my research. You kind of find your muse, you find your inner strength. It really is the case. So by waking yourself up, that was really my story. So I got in. So realizing though that this UFO phenomenon was actually a true thing, serious thing. And if you're interested in wanting to know why I believe it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But essentially, it was due to the documentary evidence that that was available, and that made me quite convinced that this was a very, very deeply important and disturbing development, one that undermined the Republican institutions of this country. Not the only knife in the back of the Republic, but one. It's like the American Republic was kind of like the assassination of Caesar, all the knives, and the UFO cover-up is one, a big one, maybe one of the first ones. And with that paradigm shift, I remember the whole first year of studying this. I literally remember lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling many nights. And it wasn't out of anxiety. It was out of an intellectual process of trying to put the pieces of my broken worldview back together. It was basically a bunch of if-then statements. So if this is true, if the UFO phenomenon is real, then what does this say about the actual history of my country? What does it say about the history of various presidential administrations, like Kennedy? Because he would have to have known. Why is this information concealed? And so I've made it my life's mission, really, to try to fill in the gaps and to try to create a mainstream narrative that includes this reality of the UFO phenomenon. Having done that made me completely convinced that there is a serious cover-up. It's the best word. Conspiracy, another good word. These are not words I'm afraid to use. And it made me understand that conspiracies are a matter of business within the national security apparatus, the national security state. And it was only a short, and then of course came 9/11. My first book was published initially in summer of 2000, so about a year before. It's a very conservative book when I look back on it now. It's a very cautious, I still like the book a lot. Though for its time, I will say, I think it was way ahead of the curve. I caught a lot of criticism from some of the old time UFO researchers that thought it was very political and very, well, it was not nearly political enough, but it was very political for that culture. Then came 9/11, which radicalized all of us. Everyone here got radicalized by it. And I think within a short period of time after 9/11, many of us started to realize that this was some dirty business. And through the decade, I, like many of you, became acquainted with the phenomenon of false flags. And the thing was, I've always kept a list of different book ideas that I wanted to engage in. And I have a little file, you know. One is a breakdown of the development of New Age culture. I would love to do a breakdown kind of along the lines of what Dave McGowan once did with the birth of the hippie generation. Anyone familiar with Dave McGowan's work? Yeah. He's gone now, which is a horrible loss. I still may do that. There's some people who've analyzed that. The connection of New Age to intelligence community, I think, is a very important one. But the idea of false flags was another idea that I've been toying with. And it's simply the case that a little over a year ago, I was going through the list, and Catherine's getting a little loud. I'm going to have to talk with her. What's that? Oh, is that it? Yeah. You guys are going to be talking this morning, like very soon, so the pressure's going to be on you. It's not all me. So yes, sir, just jump in. Go ahead. Loud. Sure, let's talk about that. The question was, how does the plethora of camera phones affect the research of UFO phenomenon? Yeah, well, it's really interesting because, you know, through the 80s and 90s and before that, the big problem for any UFO researcher was getting access to data at all. That was always the problem. You know, there would be a couple of hundred reported sightings a year in any database that you could find. And aside from the video, which I'll talk about in a minute, if you go online and look at websites, you can find, I have to look for 2015, I haven't done it. 2014 had over 14,000 recorded sightings on the two major websites that collect them. 14,000 reports. Now, that doesn't mean they're all genuine UFOs, obviously. And then you have video. There are hundreds every year now on YouTube. And the problem is, so well, the old assumption had been, we need more data. We need more video evidence. And then we realized that's actually not what we need. What we need is confirmed, well-documented, well-investigated video evidence. And this is a serious problem. There are some really great-looking videos on YouTube. We've all seen them. Some of them are proven to be hoaxes. There's one from 2011 from London, and it's a good one. You see the people in the streets of London looking up and pointing, and out of a cloud comes this bright object, and it's moving fast, and then suddenly a bunch of other bright objects moving really fast. There's nothing in the sky that looks anything like that. And then the camera pans down, and you see all the people looking up and getting really agitated. And this got out onto YouTube, and it was a very well done fake video that by a graphics company in London, where they had some of their employees go out on the street and just point at an empty sky. And people were looking up, like passersby were looking up, like, what are they pointing at? There's nothing there. And then they went back to their studio and used Adobe After Effects to put in all of these really cool video graphics. It looked totally real. until people started breaking it down. So the problem is, I'll just give you one. So for me, a video on YouTube means nothing whatsoever, nothing, unless I or someone else is able to research the actual source of that and start putting together an investigation of it, and then we can look at it. Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you. Disclosure itself as a false flag, kind of. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'll just repeat the question for the video. And by the way, thank you for your nice compliment. The thing about, I always feel uncomfortable about that, so when people say nice things in public to me. Over drinks in private is great. Just in public, it makes me a little uneasy. I've been called a jerk. That's, yeah, why not? I have no problem with that. I get that a lot. The comments on this video below will actually, you'll see many of those. So someone in one YouTube video actually called me Richard Dildo. I'm like, really? That's the best you got? I thought, okay, whatever. It's crazy. It's just totally crazy. Your question, though, about false flags, I'm happy to bounce around. That's fine. This disclosure as a false flag, essentially what you're saying, or control. Well, I co-authored a book called After Disclosure, and one of the themes that we did try to work through is disclosure will always be the attempt is a real problem. Like, how do you disclose in such a deceptive manner? How do you do it? The truth on the UFO phenomenon is so, in my view, profoundly it's disturbing, not necessarily because of the other intelligences, although there might be some things that we need to be concerned about, but primarily because of what it says about the destruction of our own society. It's like the UFO cover-up is almost like a drug addiction that's wrecked our social health in a lot of ways. It's caused us to have this disconnect between the official reality that we're supposed to believe and what's actually going on. And it damages us. It's like when you live in denial. You have a friend who's on drugs, and you're like, get up, I want to talk to you about that. And like, stop, I don't want to talk about it. And that's us as a society, in the sense of we Westerners are living kind of a lie about many things every single day through our official propaganda, and that includes the UFO subject. So when this comes out, there's going to be a lot of angry people, and there'll be a lot of questions. So how would a president of the United States control the process? Because the fact is, if President Obama tomorrow were to want to disclose the reality of UFOs, how would he actually do it and save the collective asses of all of those people who have been keeping the secret, and himself? Is he credibly going to be able to say, I just learned about this yesterday? No, I mean, no one's going to believe that. So he's going to be implicated in a lie. Everyone around him is going to be implicated in a lie. And finally, a few journalists will wake out of their coma and start asking some genuine questions. And certainly the people are going to be leading the charge with really pertinent questions. Like, how the hell have you kept this secret from us for the last 70 plus years? What does this say about the subversion of our political community, of our academic world? How did this happen? Well, it's all collusion, of course, with the intelligence community or media. All of these questions are coming out. So it's going to be an avalanche. And then the serious questions in terms of our politics will be, what is the structure of the secrecy? Who's holding the secret? Do they have free energy? That's going to come up in the first 10 minutes of discussion. And I mean, my God, the whole disclosure topic will threaten to explode instantly. This is going to be impossible to contain. So the challenge will be, how do you do it and still maintain control over the process? That's what they're certainly going to want to do. And I don't think it's going to be easy. I have another lecture that I gave earlier before I was here. Hi, Jordan.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We really prefer questioners come up to this mic.
Great. Is there going to be a microphone there? Ideal. Thank you. Perfect. If you want, you guys can just line up. Why don't you have a line, and I think that's a way better solution. I'll just answer this question, though. So I think having control over the, I'm going to step back a little bit, too. Over the process is going to be really hard to do. My theory is that there are 3 disclosure scenarios, and I'll just run these by you real quickly. So I think disclosure scenario number 1, I often have called preferred or fascist disclosure. It's not preferred by us, but it's preferred by those people who have control over the secret. I believe what they want to do is implement a absolute, like a global totalitarian system, for lack of a better word, in which they have complete control over the propaganda, the spin, the narrative, your bodies. They've toxified you, they've dumbed you down, and enveloped you in a virtual fascist dictatorship. That's my nightmarish vision. And in that situation, when they have complete control, they would prefer to have their disclosure of this reality so that there are no competing narratives, which is kind of what you're saying. Now, there's 2 other versions of disclosure, which I envision. This number 2 is really the theme of after disclosure, which I wrote, which is I now call accidental disclosure. So something unexpected happens. We are living in a completely revolutionary era where, there's WikiLeaks and there's Edward Snowden, and there's all of these things that are happening in our society that could generate something unexpected. Maybe Vladimir Putin will just say, the hell with it, I'm letting it out. Who knows? So that would to me cause a great upheaval in our society that ultimately I don't think would be easily contained, or at least that would be the great question. Could the powers that be contain it, control us, or not? And then the one that I really would like to see, because I'm still an idealist, is people-driven disclosure. So that, because here's the thing, we're living in a world, I'm going to take your question in a second, in which we're learning helplessness, all right, through all of the shock and awe being dumped at us. Naomi Klein wrote the great book Shock Doctrine, which I'm a big fan of. And in this, she talks about the phenomenon of learned helplessness as a society, ruled by trauma. Horrible things happen, whether it's Katrina or 9/11 or some other thing, and people are helpless and feeling helpless and looking for answers. And here rolls in the government with their more corporate control over your water supplies, or more pernicious laws to monitor you for your safety, and bye-bye freedom. And so that we like rats in a cage, you learn to be helpless. But I don't want disclosure as part of a fascist society. I have no interest in that. I have interest only in a disclosure in which we reclaim our own power as free people. Otherwise, I want no part of it. I don't really want the government to say, okay, here it is, we're going to parcel it out. Like, screw you. I have no interest. So we have to unlearn helplessness. We have to learn how to empower ourselves, and the only way to do it is really by fighting back. Some people don't like the word, like aggressive language. Well, I don't really care. I do. And I feel like when someone's fighting you, you do fight back. It's great to turn the other cheek, and I don't want us to get subsumed by anger and rage, but I really do believe that when there's a war against you, you got to stand up and you got to defend yourself. And in fighting back, even through words, through nonviolence, you empower yourself. So I would like to see a people-driven process by which we obtain this, by which we get, because all the information on UFOs is there, all the information even on false flags, it's all here. Researchers around the world are looking into this, and we need to generate a critical mass and present this and make the case. I still believe we can do that. So how about we do questions lining up here? Hi, Tom. You got to get up to the microphone so people can hear you.
Hillary came out and said she wants to expose about the UFO investigated. Do you feel that's a false flag? What's she saying now if she's elected?
Yeah, well, there's a few people here who are working very hard on getting Hillary Clinton to talk about UFOs, and I've had a long-standing conversation with them about that. You know, I jokingly, but not jokingly, yesterday said Hillary Clinton is Dick Cheney's twin sister wearing a pantsuit. She's an imperialist neocon. I mean, what else can you say? Gleefully involved in the entire destruction of nations. So I'm not really a fan, and I don't really think that she's truthful. And so anything that she says on this, I'm very skeptical of. Having said that, if Hillary Clinton today or tomorrow or any time were to start talking about the extraterrestrial or UFO phenomenon, I would have a pretty good idea on how truthful she is, because I feel like I have a handle on the subject, and there's a lot of people in this room who would feel likewise. I think, you know, I would leave it to her words. And if she were to speak honestly and openly about the nature of the phenomenon, about the nature of the cover-up, and about the nature of her part in her knowledge of it, then I would think, good, let's hear it. If she were to say, on the other hand, well, we're going to have to look into it, which is what she already said to the media. We'll have to go to Area 51. Really? That's what you're going to do? You're going to go to Area 51, Hillary Clinton? So if she's going to just do platitudes and bullshit, then we can call her on it. So, wait, someone asked, do I think Donald Trump? I heard Donald Trump.
You think Donald Trump is capable of doing it?
Donald Trump, you know, I don't think he would. I think these people, I do not believe any of these politicians are willingly ever going to be truthful on the disclosure topic. Now, I think it's actually really good that that people like Stephen Bassett are pushing these politicians, and he really is with his Twitter campaign, and he's forcing them through the journalists to answer questions about this subject. And the whole Hillary Clinton connection to the Rockefeller Initiative is a genuinely important subject of our history, and it really needs to be explored. So I think it's good, but I think that right now the straitjacket of the establishment media is still strong enough that they're not really going to push her on it. But I could be wrong. I mean, I've been told last night after this, you know, last night by one of the individuals here that I am wrong, and that Hillary is going to let it out, and that President Obama is going to disclose. I mean, I was told this last night, and I don't believe it, but we'll just have to see. And the same with Trump. I think Trump gets brought in. The problem is, you know, whistleblowers like William Binney of the NSA and others have made it very clear that when you're a politician, you get to a certain level, one of the three-letter agencies sits down with you and they let you know about every little thing you've done in your life, and they hold it over you, and they control you. I think that's how it is. So if he's going to disclose a reality, he's going to have to do it really well. So we'll see. Hi, ma'am.
So you've looked at chronologies, and I wondered what patterns you've discerned over the past, and if you want to make any projections out from there. But particularly what patterns you've seen in the last several decades or whatever time period you looked at.
Yeah, well, I've constructed a chronology of the UFO-related phenomenon that goes now. I mean, it's equivalent to a 3,000-page book. It's not a 500-page book anymore. So it's much larger than it was when I wrote my first volume. And it covers pretty much the whole history of what I would call UFO phenomenon from ancient times till today. And one pattern is that the sheer quantity of data, of sightings. I think what people don't appreciate, and this isn't even including all the stuff like the National UFO Reporting Center on the web, just the number of sightings that have been written about and discussed it's almost overwhelming. It's too many to write about. I had to pick and choose the ones that were the best documented, in my opinion. But what I was, you know, for me, the patterns were a lot of military encounters. That's been always my main interest, because if the U.S. or some foreign military were to encounter a UFO, then my assumption is there's a document trail somewhere. There's a response to it. What's the response? Can we learn what that response is? And also, because it's a military encounter, that's a government body. That's an official part of what we as taxpayers pay for. So what have they done about it? And why have they not discussed it openly? I mean, we're paying for it. Why, in a form of government that citizens are supposed to be in charge of, why are they not answering? But the patterns, it's a hard question to answer. I would see, well, a lot of geographic patterns, without a doubt. So waves of sightings in particular areas would come out. And then also, particularly, and I'm thinking back, in the 50s and 60s, there were absolute definite responses and public statements by Air Force personnel and by other agencies about UFOs that were definitely connected to the sightings. So I feel like I was able to see that clearly enough. When I wrote all of my national security state books, there were basically three legs that they stand on: the sightings, the politics, and the citizens' efforts to end secrecy. Those are the three pillars of those books. I don't think that's a good answer, but it's the best. Yes, Joe?
A couple of quick things. One is somebody who hung in there and earned tenure eventually and then resigned it, you didn't really miss out on anything. So I'm glad you did what you did. It was a wise choice. Secondly, there's a former two-term governor of New Mexico who's likely to be running for president again. And I would encourage folks to look at the Libertarian candidate and Governor Gary Johnson if he were to call out publicly on this issue. He was there for the 50th anniversary of Roswell. He was governor back then. But my question for you is, you mentioned the CIA and studying the history of the CIA. I met David Warbosh a couple of times. He's the head historian of the CIA. Came to Las Vegas for a conference at UNLV with the Roadrunners group, the guys that flew the A-12 boxcart that became the SR-71 and all that. And they were declassifying a lot of that program, collecting the oral histories of the pilots and all that. And they actually had an event at the Little Alien where Warbosh, this PhD from Columbia, head historian at CIA, was there to acknowledge these guys. And so in those conversations with him, I discovered something probably not unsurprising, which is the CIA has like a dozen, apparently, full-time historians collecting and preserving their history, I guess, sub rosa. And the US government has apparently hundreds of full-time PhD historians. They even have conferences. So the National Park Service, the NSA, the FBI, they all have PhD historians. Do you have connections?
None of whose works that we've really been able to read because they're classified histories.
Right, that was my question. Do you have connections into that community of historians at all? Do you think they read your work and respect it? And then the fundamental question is, I suspect, like me, in that world, and you've talked about this in the past obliquely, is we've met people who apparently are read into this issue. Like I have two very good friends, one at NASA, one at a senior level at the Pentagon, both retired now. My friend at NASA was chief medical officer. He's a little more open about it, Roger Billica, now in private practice in Boulder, who've shared things that I would not say openly. I don't want to get them in trouble. They haven't really shared anything terrific, but in those contacts within those communities in the three-letter agencies, if they were to die, or if they were to tell you you could talk about it, how much of that is part of your consciousness around studying this field, the things that you can't share openly, you've been told by those who maybe have access at a deeper level?
Thanks for the question, Joe. Joe Buckman, by the way, is a really great presence in our field as well. He was very much involved in helping organize a citizen hearing on disclosure with Steve Bassett.
I think you're really cute, too.
Oh, thanks. You're adorable. So there's a lot of questions that you asked there, but in terms of official classified historians, no, none of them, to my knowledge, have written to me, and I don't know who they are. So there's a great book by a fellow named Trevor Paglen called Blank Spots on the Map. I'm sure that a lot of people here have read it, in which he talks about the classified nature of many U.S. military locations, and he offered his assessment that more than 50% of all official U.S. government documents were classified in one way or another. So you can infer that more than half of all the government activity in our country is secret from us. And it has to be the case that the day will have to come when that classified, it's like a body that's not properly buried. It's going to come up. And the classified history of this country is going to have to become known. And think of the revolutionary act that would be of truly learning all of the secrecy that's been going on and what it has been. it is utterly explosive. I have personally, like you, Joe, and like many of you, I think I've spoken. I've had some interesting, quiet conversations with people who will tell me things in a confidential way. I'm often not comfortable talking about it publicly because I just feel like it's unfair. I don't like to say to someone, and there are a lot of researchers in this field who will say, basically, trust me, this is my source, and I'm going to tell you this, and then you hear something that's just doesn't sound credible. And I don't like to do that. But it is true that there have been times when I've had deep conversations with people, some of whom are famous, who've said things to me about their absolute knowledge of alien bodies and technology that's been sequestered away. I've talked about this from time to time. Who've talked explicitly about their knowledge of a group above and beyond the U.S. president that manages this, and like the Builder, something along the line of Bilderberger type level of activity. So I've spoken, with other individuals who've talked about their underground bases where they've had extended briefings about the reality of this. And we're talking presidential administration level people who've imparted this to me. But all of that, these folks, like one scientist said to me, look, if I were to come out publicly with this information that I know I have, and this is a guy who knows at least one, probably more U.S. presidents on a first-name basis. He's a very well plugged-in guy. He said, if I were to come out with this knowledge, and if I were to go to the New York Times and say, this guy and this person and this one, they're in on the UFO secret, what good would it do me? Because as I learned, he was not in the innermost circle. There's like layers of this. He's gotten farther than probably anyone in this room, but he's not at the Holy Grail in his opinion. And he said, if I were to let this fact known, I would lose all of my own access. And he's working his own way through the labyrinth. And so these people are very constrained, and then you've just got, and he said also, like, none of them sign security oaths at that level. All of them, it's just understood like you don't talk. It's like in the mafia, you don't sign anything. They'll mess you up if you don't play nice. And he said at that level, no security oaths are necessary.
Yeah, I just want to add, because this is being recorded about my friend at NASA. He does not talk about this issue, but it's more in the way that he does not talk about it. And to amplify what you said, he said, as much as I might like to talk about certain things, even with my own wife, if I were to do so, they would find out. I go to a place worse than Leavenworth. We'd lose the pension, the health care benefits, the retirement. Everything would be gone. And you've got to understand, to get this kind of job in the government, you basically sign a contract that eliminates the Bill of Rights.
Exactly, yeah. Absolutely. And this has been for many, many, many years.
Right.
Many years. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes.
Could you briefly sketch for us an overview of what you see as the current situation of extraterrestrial interaction with the United States? Who are the groups? What are their agenda? The ET groups, what is their agenda? Who specifically are they working with? What is being done?
I'm never comfortable answering this type of a question, but I will offer some speculations, and that's basically it. There's what I would confidently state to any mainstream media outlet, and then there's what I would not confidently state, but here for this recording, I'm going to state it anyway. So I would confidently state, of course, and this is a no-brainer, that this is a real phenomenon. It's engaged our military in a documented way for years and years, and we know it. And they've lied about it for years, and you could take that to the bank. There have been innumerable airspace violations by objects that just don't look normal, that don't behave normally, that have been chased by our jets, and so on and on. No question about it. And that they've found, it's head scratchers. They're wondering what these things are, and these encounters make no sense in any conventional sense. So then you go deeper, and I would say, looking on the research that is credible to me, there are gray aliens. They exist. My best guess is that they're artificially created, artificially generated, product of some kind of artificial intelligence. I don't believe that they're born like we are. I think they're grown or created, manufactured somehow, which would give them a completely different psychology than we have. I don't think that they nurse their mother. I mean, I don't think that they have, it's, I think the psychology of some of these beings, if they are artificially created, is literally alien to us. We operate on emotions. We operate on a need for love because of the way that we're raised. I don't necessarily see that same fact with them, and that shows in the interactions that they've had with people who have apparent abduction experiences. So I believe that that's real. I think that I'm inclined to agree with people like Dr. David Jacobs that there is a hybrid program in place. I have myself had many conversations with individuals who have talked about encounters with totally human-looking beings that are absolutely telepathic. So in other words, who don't seem human and don't act like normal people do, that make one wonder, are these like what Jacobs calls, his hybrids, human-looking hybrids? Is that what we're dealing with? Or is it the case of a human-looking fifth column that's been cultivated by these other beings and works for them, and that was inculcated with advanced psi abilities? So I think that there are human-looking beings that are not of this society that are here. I'm not saying that they're violent. I'm not saying that they're evil. I don't know what they're doing. They seem to be rather standoffish. As far as other beings are concerned, people talk about reptilians. There's a lot of claims of this. I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like we're outmatched in many ways by this phenomenon. And then, you have claims of more outlandish creatures, whether it's the blue avians, the so-called blue avians elsewhere, or other types of creatures that just don't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I try to be very careful, but I would say this, if I were one of them, I would want to infiltrate human society in one way or another, because I feel human society is where the action is. There are researchers who denigrate us and think, we're not interesting, we just engage in tribal warfare. I would say, on the contrary, we're fascinating. And we're on a technological trajectory that in the blink of an eye allows us to go from sticks and stones and horses and carts to advanced AI and nanotech and genetic engineering, all within in quantum computing, and within 100, 150 years, it's nothing. So they have to know we're about to enter their own realm in one way or another. The advanced intelligence of our civilization is just going up exponentially. So if I were them, I would want to get my hooks into human society and manage it and make sure that it's pliable. That's what I would want to do. The last thing I'll say is that there was a remote viewer back in the 70s named Pat Price, who's kind of legendary, and a lot of people here, this is where SRI, was doing the remote viewing program. He walked into the office, this is written about, of Hal Puthoff, who was running the remote viewing protocols at the time, and said, just FYI, on my own, I did some remote viewing of where alien bases are on planet Earth. This is back in the 70s. He said, there's one in the Pyrenees, there's one in Mount Hayes, Alaska. And he said the one in Mount Hayes, Alaska was protected partly by the US government itself. Like no one would get to it. And he said, there were people in the government who were making sure it was off limits. Now, people can think, well, remote viewing, what can you make of it? But Pat Price was one of the most unbelievably gifted remote viewers in modern history, seems to me. He was uncanny. And he solved the what? The Patty Hearst case. Yes, thank you. That's right. He had the unusual ability to read alphanumeric data remotely, which is a real skill. In other words, like file cabinets and name tags and things like that. He was a dangerous guy. And he was highly regarded. And this is his evidence. This is what he said. So I think that there's quiet interaction. How deep it goes, is it a David Icke type scenario in which they are running the world? Don't know.
Hi, Richard. My question is about the very public disclosures that we saw from Julian Assange of WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, and I want to know, were those real disclosures by real whistleblowers or CIA limited hangouts?
Wait, disclosures of, somehow my brain just shut down, of, not, you didn't say UFOs.
No,
No,
just disclosures out of...
Just like the Snowden leaks in general. And
Yeah, was that a real disclosure, or was that a CIA limited hangout where they controlled the information, controlled the event, did a big media experience, and they fed us exactly what they wanted us to know?
Yeah,
And we didn't really learn anything that we didn't already know.
It's a great question. I feel personally that the Snowden leaks is a very important watershed in our history, and I absolutely support those leaks. Having said that, I mean, it's very clear Edward Snowden himself at one point talked about his own connection to the CIA. It's in the public record. He did state this. But that in itself doesn't really disqualify him, in my opinion. It seems to me that there are always going to be disagreements and rivalries within the intelligence community and jealousies. And I don't think it's a secret that a lot of individuals have looked at the NSA's overwhelming dominance and said, we don't really support this. And that, you know, when Snowden left the country, he went to Hong Kong. He was right by a CIA station house, and that was actually reported in the news media. It seems that he had important help in helping him get out of the country safely and then into Russia. The idea of a limited hangout's an important one. It's if you have a major secret and you know it's explosive in nature, and you know it at some point is going to blow up on you, how do you kind of relieve the pressure, as it were? You release some information in a way that's not traceable or not, you release the information, then you run away from it, and you kind of make it an orphan. And this is a genuine thing that the CIA and other intel agencies have done. But I don't think of the Snowden leaks in that regard, because he has confirmed a lot of what dedicated researchers have already known, of course. I mean, people back like James Bamford and even earlier have talked about what the NSA has done in terms of monitoring every single thing about your life. But the amount of detail that Snowden has been able to provide is really quite extraordinary, in my opinion. And it has kickstarted a public discussion on this that is, yes, being managed as well as possible by the mainstream media. But I'm not inclined to think of it as a limited hangout or a control mechanism. I know there are people who may do that and they don't trust him. There's something that's, I don't trust him. I'm not at the point. I haven't seen anything that makes me think he's a problem. I think he's been a great benefit. That's my opinion.
Hello. I really respect your work. I'm Joyce Anastasia, and I work with leaders who want to make a greater difference, like I think a lot of people in this room want to make a difference. I'd like to ask a question that would bridge the gap between the new paradigm and the work that you're doing. So my question is, do you have any suggestions for people here around the new paradigm and disclosure and what they could do, considering constraints of family, full-time jobs, and wanting to work between their job now and going into deep research like you did? What did you do and how did it impact your life?
One thing I did is I became broke because I ended up working for myself for my whole life and not working for a company, which allowed me to do the research that I do. It's very hard for many of you. I realize you have, sometimes you have very prominent jobs and you've got to be careful about maintaining your public reputation. And if you were to start getting into things like UFOs or false flags, it's not helpful for your career. In fact, it could be ruinous for your career. It has been ruinous for people's careers. So I have to respect that. The only thing I could say is for those of us who don't have that type of sensitive employment, let's talk about those people first. I think the greatest changes that occur are on a cultural level. I now believe that. I think that cultural movements can get a great deal of momentum. I mentioned the citizen hearing on disclosure earlier. I think it's an example. In other words, the idea of that back in 2013 was to get a kind of a mock congressional hearing out in the public forum and to discuss the topic of UFOs in an intelligent way. There were people who criticized that all the way through, saying, oh, well, you people think you're going to attain disclosure and that President Obama is going to. And, like, I never believed that ever. But I do think the value of something like that is on a cultural level. It's on YouTube now. Millions of people, many young people, have seen those proceedings. And they thought, my goodness, there's well-dressed and articulate people talking about this topic before retired members of Congress in Washington. It's impressive to many people. And I think it's having a cultural change, a cultural effect. I feel like for what we can do, is work toward transforming the culture around us. The first thing that means is becoming educated and not just spewing off things until you're really confident you've got your facts. And then the second thing is in being courageous. And that's a hard thing to quantify, but I think it's only by large numbers of people feeling inspired by their knowledge and being brave enough to engage in their fellow citizens that we're really going to make any widespread change. And at some point, I believe the cultural changes will be great enough that it'll be a case of the emperor's new clothes. We'll realize, my goodness, we're like a massive majority of the population. Why are we not talking about this? And we're going to call them out in a brave manner. That's my belief. I don't really have any confidence at this point in our current political system and paradigm, but I do believe in the structure of our government that is of a representative government. I believe strongly in that. So I feel that a crisis is going to have to happen that will result in a kind of messy house cleaning, and I would really want for us to come back to some way of having a governance in which people have freedom and the ability. I think it's going to happen because, part of this conference is talked about energy developments. I happen to believe that in what we might call free energy, just using the term loosely, this is really one of the keys of the way out. And I'll just explain. Like yesterday, I talked about false flags. I believe that one of the foundations for the false flag era that we live in is dominated by the U.S. petrodollar system and the United States' absolute perceived need to maintain that system, to control other nations, and to institute regime change when necessary, and basically it's really using a hierarchical system of control over limited natural resources that's in a specific geographic region, oil and natural gas, by which they have as much of a monopoly over that as possible, and that gives them unbelievable amounts of power over everything. And until that power is broken, I think we're really at a great handicap. So one thing we can really do to help ourselves is to promote independent energy solutions. I think it's really important. This is how they tie together. It's in us getting our own autonomy, physical energy autonomy in terms of shelter, autonomy in terms of food as well, but certainly autonomy in terms of energy, that we will then be able to break the fundamental, this whole hierarchical system. And we need to do it soon, because you know why? Because the way that the global economy is working right now, you have millions of Americans making $12,000 a year working at places like Target. They can't survive. You can't have a world like that. So if it goes the way it keeps going, we're going to have an enormous dispossessed class of people living lives as serfs without real jobs. But the good news is we're also moving into a different kind of a paradigm where that model, it clearly is not going to be functioning like that in 50 years or less. So we have the opportunity for a genuine way to construct an autonomous life amongst ourselves. It's a really big effort, but I think that's that's really where we're moving. So all of this talk about government disclosure within the current paradigm, it's important for us to have it because we have to never give up on the idea of rule of the people. But I suspect nothing's going to break until the energy paradigm and other major structural paradigms break. I don't really know if I answered your question. Okay, great.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for all the work you do. And
Thanks.
I kind of go back to the statement that was made yesterday, that I guess intelligence is kind of the ability to hold two different opposing thoughts in your head and still continue to function. So the two opposing thoughts that are in my head that I would like you to comment on and kind of maybe express where you come out on it. If you talk to Catherine, she would say that we're probably in this economic slow burn. If you listen to many others, that post every day, you get the shriekometer, as she would call it too, and that we're going to be in World War III, we're going to see dislocations like you can't believe, et cetera. So it's kind of in the paradigm of like giving birth. We're in a paradigm, we're going to a new paradigm. It's like the process of giving birth. And we can go into a beautiful future paradigm, I would hope, but we got to get there, and we're probably going to go through some kind of a transition period, which could be somewhat messy, just like giving birth. And I'd like you to kind of focus on the transition. What do you anticipate might, of all the different scenarios, from calamity to just slow burn and we'll all adjust easily, slowly, where do you think it might be?
That's a very complex question, and I have to think about this. So you're asking, how do we get from here to there, essentially? How do we get from where we are right now in this basically hierarchical control system paradigm to something that's better than that? And that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I feel like there are going to be I often feel like we're in a race between it's us against those, let's call them the powers that be. And I think that as I've often said, I think they're trying to implement a global system of total control and surveillance and intimidation over the entire population, to beat us over the head with a stick that never stops beating us, to force everyone to live their whole lives ducking their head and not protesting and not speaking up. They're already achieving it. No, check that. They haven't already achieved it. They are portraying us through the mainstream media that they've achieved it, but actually there are many of us who disagree. But that's the world that they want, and there are, there are tools that we are developing that are going in the opposite direction. It seems to me that within the next 10 years, let's say 10, 20 years, we're going to have the genuine ability to break one of the main holds over power that they have over us. So I'm talking whether it's financial, energy, food, or information. Information's already been broken, but I'm thinking energy. This is my pet theory. My pet theory is that in terms of energy harvesting, we're probably a decade or less away from something that's actually going to break through in a mass way that's out of the control of the establishment. What I believe, my feeling is that it's a marriage between inventive people around the world and next generation 3D printing. I feel like that's because 3D printing is the decentralization of manufacturing that we really need in this world for people to have control over their products, over their lives. And so I keep thinking that there's going to be some smart individual who's uploading their own energy harvesting device that we can 3D print, and that will allow us to say, up yours to our utility companies, and allow us to go off the grid. I think if that ever happens, that's a key watershed moment. And it will cause disruption, but I think it would be that would be a great thing. I don't know. It's a complicated question. And I've just told we have 15 minutes left, and I don't know how much more I don't want to waste time with meaningless answers. Thanks.
You mean I only have 15 minutes left?
You have 15 minutes, sir, unless those people want to mug you. Let's try to be efficient, though. I think it's a good idea.
I don't think that we're the only admirers of Edwin Snowden.
Could you speak up a little bit more to the mic?
It actually works. We're probably not the only admirers of Edwin Snowden. I actually heard from a friend that he's secretly dating Angela Merkel.
Merkel, yeah. My mic is out. Oh, there we go.
Some people got that.
Okay, so do you have anything on point, though?
I come from an academic background myself, actually. I went to Temple University, and I was lucky enough to hear Immanuel Velikovsky deliver, I think, one of his first lectures in America at that time, and I had to take it with a grain of salt. Two things that I want to talk about very briefly are the things that academia pushed me out of completely, and that is spiritual science. I wasn't going to talk about this at all, but I decided to just give it a minute, and that is that when the establishment puts fluoride in the drinking water, as they have done in this county, and we're working to get it out in this next election cycle, so pay attention.
Good.
It's going to happen. You've got to vote, though. This is the thing about local elections. They're important. They are doing it for a reason, and the reason is actually spiritual. It actually keeps your brain from working at a higher level so that when you meditate, you can't project your energy very far. When certain people who have not had this kind of fluoride treatment and who do develop their spiritual power by practicing meditation come together in a group, as was done in Los Angeles a couple of times, in a group meditation, it produces a period of no violent crimes in the police records. There's a young guy who lives in Zagreb, Croatia, who is a advanced spiritual teacher who just looks at people and their cancer goes away, and he advises getting together in groups and doing this kind of meditation. When he visits New York, there's no violent crime for 24 hours or 48 hours while he's there.
I just want to jump in. I want to thank you for that, and I'm going to try to be efficient so that everyone else can have an opportunity to say something. Yeah, this is the whole fluoride issue. There are many of you more expert in this than me, but I think it's absolutely a good idea to take that out. And in terms of the spirituality part, I would just add that regarding the UFO phenomenon, one reason it might be hidden and concealed is not simply to conceal what they are, but part of what we are. That is, the interactions that they have with us all seem to be mind to mind. So it says something about them, but it says something about us. And, probably in unpacking a lot of the realities of the world around us, we will discover more intimately what we as human beings are about. But I'm going to ask you, I'm going to just have it moving along as quickly as possible so everyone can have a chance to ask. Thank you, though, sir. We'll try to be efficient. Can we do that?
We'll be fast and efficient. So I'm going to ask you about an experience I had, not a contact experience. I was at the UFO Congress 2 years ago, and there was a gentleman, I believe his name was Colonel Alexander. I'm not good with names. And he was speaking. He was one of the speakers, and his central thesis was, yes, there are UFOs. But the reason we don't know about them is because the waters are completely muddied. The research waters are muddied because of all the New Age people and all the non-discerning people and the woo-woo people that are throwing so much crap in that we can't get to the truth.
Right.
Okay? So I came away from that. I was sitting next to Timothy Good, actually. And I had an aha, and I'm going to ask you about this.
Sure. We'll be quick here.
This is it.
Yeah.
So it seemed to me, as I walked away, it's like, what was going on there? Because he didn't actually say anything about the woo-woo perspective. He just kind of dismissed it all. And it seemed to me that what he was doing was acknowledging what everybody knows. Yes, there's UFOs. Yes, there's something, but completely he said nothing about compartmentalized programs, black budgets, anything that actually has import around this issue.
He is controlled opposition.
Right.
That's what John Alexander is. I had an internet debate with John Alexander about 5 years ago, and I was sick as a dog during that debate, so if you find us somewhere, I sounded like hell, but he sounded worse. So I think, but yeah, his idea is that there's no cover-up because he checked and he didn't find one. That's literally what he says. You can believe it. Yeah, I just look at him as absolute controlled opposition.
In terms of overall disclosure, does it speak to that, this transition we're thinking about? Because we have people like him.
Yeah, he's part of an establishment media complex, and his job, I feel, is to, you make a little bit of an acknowledgement, and then you just keep it moving along. We don't know what's going on. We have no idea. It's a great mystery. Well, it is a mystery. There's no question, but there's definite knowledge there. He talks as if there's no such thing as special access programs and compartmentation and black budgets. So it's really, I don't even consider what he says part of the real conversation.
My question addresses the range of different types of ET contacts in general terms without getting into particulars. There's a researcher that most of you know, David Wilcock, who talks about this stuff, talks about the underground chambers, and talks about the lost gold. Every once in a while, he comes back to his experience living with a group of people who brought through some information called the raw material of the Law of One, who makes it clear that there are very positive ET influences that have been going on a long time. So my question to you is, are you familiar with this kind of information, and do you think it answers some of the questions like why there's so much polarity going on, like in our election, and why these negative influences have been kept at bay for so long, when it makes sense that with all the power they seem to have, without an intervening other polarity, they would have taken over a long time ago.
All right, I'm going to answer this quickly, and thank you for that. Any kind of information that comes to me, I have to judge. How can I examine this? How can I prove or disprove the truth of this? So what we call channeled information or inside sources that I am personally not able to investigate, I have to be very cautious about it. I would encourage everyone to be very cautious about information that is given to you on the basis of trust. Doesn't mean it's not true. I will just add in terms of things like channel information or what the skeptics call the woo. I think that a lot of it, I think that we are able, I talked about remote viewing, I make no bones about it. I think we have capabilities of perceiving things that are not through ordinary means, but we have to be careful in forming conclusions. So relating whether it's the raw material or any of these other types of channeled pieces, I'm going to decline from giving an opinion here. I just don't really know what I'm going to say about it.
Thank you. Did you have the privilege of ever spending time with Dr. John Mack?
I met John Mack one time and only one time in my life. It was in 2002 at an event in New York City. I don't really even know if he knew who I was. Okay. He was very nice to me. I have become friends with a number of his former colleagues, including Dr. Rudy Shield and a number of others over at who are associated with Harvard.
So my question would be, how has his work informed your own, if any?
I look at John Mack as a very brilliant philosophical mind in this field, and he's actually had increasingly over the years a bigger impact on my way of understanding not just the ET phenomenon or the UFO phenomenon, but really how to handle it as a mature person philosophically. One thing John Mack wrote that has really resonated with me is that the whole process of personal growth comes at the expense of the illusions that we ourselves grew up with. So you have to shed the illusions about your society and about yourself before you can actually achieve that growth. It's painful, but you have to go through it. I'm actually really grateful for that insight by him. Yes.
A dark pondering in my mind about the knowledge being power that the elite might have at the innermost circles. We've heard about weaponry, everything else, but the thought that came to my mind is, what about curing disease and increasing life expectancy? What if the technology exists in that circle where we could be modifying our telomeres, our chromosomes, and living 500, 1,000 years, curing the various diseases? What if, and people are dying and suffering right now with that not being out there? It's, what an avalanche if disclosure really occurs and probing happens.
Right. Well, these are questions that I've asked myself many times. And what will human society look like in 1 century from now? I have a feeling we have a hard time conceiving it. In terms of longevity, I have a fear. I have a lot of fears. So some of my new age friends are like, well, you shouldn't live in fear, man. But because you're going to make that reality happen, but I can't help it. So my fear is that there's going to be utopia for those who can afford it. All right, so that's longevity, that's super intelligence, super strength, super everything. And then for those who can't afford it, a different kind of a life where they're basically plugged into their own little matrix. I don't want that to be the future. So, but what would human society look like if people all of a sudden had life expectancy a span of 500 years or more? I don't even know if I would want that, to be honest with you. I guess I'd have to find a way of staying engaged all the time.
I don't think the elite would want 8 billion people living 500 years.
No, I don't think so at all. But that's something we're looking at. We don't have time for one or two more.
I was a colleague of John Mack's at Harvard and then became the director of his institute after he died. And he was killed by a drunken driver in London, which I don't know if that's suspicious or not. Interestingly, to the day, it was his father had been killed by somebody. It was the anniversary of his father's death. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, it was because of going to his memorial that there was this figure there named J.J. Hurtak, and my understanding is that he talks to the government about these things, and someone gave me a copy of his book, The Keys of Enoch, and I'm just curious about what his role is and what you could comment about him.
I've known him and his wife Desiree for a number of years. I've gone to some events with them, but I really wouldn't be able to give you an analysis of what he's about.
I see. Okay.
I really wouldn't be able to do that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because the Keys of Enoch seemed like Greek to me. I couldn't make much sense out of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of writing out there. I try to focus on the data that I can actually work with and make something of and use as a foundation for my own speculations. I'm actually not interested in other people's speculations as much as my own. And I like to work on my foundation, and then I take it and work from there.
And one other question. Carol Rosen, who worked with Werner von Braun, she said that there was this plan that first there'd be the war against communism, then the war against terrorism, and then the war against ETs. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, it was her conversation, and she's talked about many times with Dr. Werner von Braun in his last few years. She was his personal assistant for a while, and he said this to her. He said, Carol, first they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and then the ET, basically like a false flag type of scenario. I believe that she had this conversation with him. I think it's obvious Werner von Braun was well plugged in and had a lot of knowledge. I think it's less clear to me that he actually had definitive knowledge, or was he just giving his opinion? You know, this was in the 1970s. It's now 40 years later. It's totally possible, and it's totally possible that he was just giving his opinion. I'm a little skeptical of an ET false flag scenario. I've talked about this many times. I just don't believe, I'm not convinced that that's a plausible scenario. If you want to implement a global police state, I don't really think that you need to do it through a Project Bluebeam ET invasion scenario. I think you'd have a hard time persuading a lot of intensely hostile scientists around the world that this is a real thing. It's a large thing to overcome, but maybe I'm just not being imaginative. We have one more question. Thank you for that. Last question.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for being here, and I've learned a lot from you. I'm new to this. I came to it through a personal experience 3 years ago where I had what you would call a classic spiritual awakening through meditation. And on that point, I've, over the last 3 years, kind of been on this quest to try to understand my experience. And what I have learned in my question posed to you is, we are now learning in this new age about the power of meditation, both individual meditation and group and collective meditation. And I think therein lies one of the secrets to solving this problem that we're faced with today, is discovering our true power through meditation as what you might call spirit or soul, and bring people together with common intent and cohesion to bring about the kind of change that we all here want.
I totally agree with you. And I'm an avid practitioner of yoga. I love it. I'm never going to stop for the rest of my life. And I feel it has worked its own very positive changes in my life. And I think meditation, absolutely. Think of it this way. If there's ever going to be any kind of hope of communication with other beings, we really have to step up our own game. And the only way to do it is by increasing our own ability to have focused, intelligent, mature thoughts in these heads of ours rather than being bombarded by a whole lot of meaningless junk, which is often, how it is. This is our society. And we have to elevate ourselves, whether we're dealing with other beings or ourselves, human beings, if we're really going to go anywhere. Considering I had not the slightest idea of what this gathering would be like when I walked in here, it turned out to be a nice, enjoyable experience. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much.